Hey everyone, NBZ here, and before we start today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that we had a few technical difficulties going on Bali's end mainly, because his laptop is on fire and is dying, and I'm telling him to get a new one, but his Mac is his favourite thing in the world, and he's a massive Apple fanboy, so he's probably just going to get another Mac. But that aside, first and third segment, a little bit of fuzziness on Bali's audio, not sure where that came from, and then in the second segment, there is some skipping happening in his audio, which I've tried to patch up as best I can. It's kind of similar to the situation we had with John Bernardo when he was on, but I think it's okay. I don't know. I've done my best, but it should sound somewhat coherent. Anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know of those difficulties. Hopefully we'll get things sorted for next time, but the show is still listenable, so I hope you enjoy anyway. Here is the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 91. My name is NBZ, and I'm joined as always by Bali.
Hi NBZ, I'm very well, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I feel like that's one of the most normal intros I've done in a while. Didn't try to mince my words.
Normal's not normal unless you combine it with being extraordinary all the time, and you can't be extraordinary all the time.
I mean, I am extraordinary all the time.
Yeah, but then that just becomes normal.
It's very true. We have to break the mold sometimes, and that's what we've done here today.
People don't like normal. Like you can ask the whole population, like, do you think you have a good IQ? And all of them will say that they're above average.
Yeah, I agree.
But obviously, someone has to be average and below average.
Yeah, no one likes to admit it, but
right.
Someone has to do the job.
So if we want to put in an average episode every now and then, so be it.
Well, look, I'm not saying the episode's going to be average. The intro might be average. Intro. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a stellar episode, as always, because this podcast is never anything less than stellar. I'm NBZ, as I said, and we're here. Episode 91. We're crawling close to that 100, Bali. It seems close. It may be a little further away. With the nature of us doing an episode every 2 weeks, it does kind of crawl along a bit. So, cool.
It's crept up on us a bit, though. It's kind of
maybe
wow.
a little bit. We're
in the 90s.
But we're going to be, that's our favourite year. 91, of course, for both of us, the year we were born. So I guess,
good point.
some
the best time to have an average episode.
It is. It's the best time to be playing video games, Bali. So how about you tell us what's going on with the show today?
For the show, we're going to talk about what we've been playing for the first segment. Our second segment will be some listener emails, as usual. And then for the third segment, we've got an interesting email to go over that talks about the NES and the SNES, and we can maybe mention some of the news and rumors with the SNES Classic and obviously the discontinuation of the NES Classic. Yeah,
indeed. It's interesting stuff going on there, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to say, but we have a lot to say about other things as well. And Bali, how about you tell us about some of the video game things you've been involved with the last couple of weeks?
Sure, I've got three little things. First thing, very quickly, Caroline beat Link Between Worlds.
Wow, congratulations, round of applause.
Really
very
fast.
Good stuff.
And I was very shocked and impressed. And she actually finished that game with more hearts than me. So she explored more of Hyrule and Lorule, collected more stuff, saw more of that game than I did, which is
when I think about it though,
impressive.
Bali, I do think that because we were kind of playing this for the podcast when we were first starting out, and you were just in love with this game and you just wanted to mainline it so hard, I feel like both of us maybe just kind of burned through it in a very short period of time. Maybe didn't give it room to breathe. But
I don't think I mainlined it necessarily. I definitely collected a lot of the pieces of ore and stuff. And that's an interesting point, is that Caroline didn't get... She got one piece of ore, and obviously there are 4 pieces of ore in the game. You can upgrade your sword twice. So she didn't upgrade her sword once to face the final boss. So
that's insanity.
It was a bit of a slog for her, but she did it herself. I didn't help. I didn't say oh, this is how you do it. I just let her do it. She died a lot, but she eventually beat it. And she only got 2 bottles, which is the other crazy thing. So she beat the final boss with 2 bottles and about 3/4 of the hearts, and the weakest sword. So yeah, that was a bit crazy.
Playing it hardcore, I can tell.
Yeah, exactly. And then she's just like, what's Master Quest? I'm like, oh, don't bother with that. It's not. It's a bit of a slog. But then without me like saying, oh, what game are you gonna play next? She's like already just started Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. Like,
oh
just
wow, really?
yeah, she's just gone for it because I recommended before she started Link Between Worlds that Shantae and the Pirate's Curse would be something she should maybe check out. And I sort of said to her, it's probably a bit harder than Link Between Worlds, but it's a great game. We've talked about it. I played it start of last year, and so
it's an interesting one to go for. It's not kind of a classic I would crutch on, but you know.
No, I brought over like Luigi's Mansion 2, which you might give a while.
That's a game. That's a hell of a game. Luigi's Mansion 2.
And she's not a big like platformer fan. She wants something sort of third person that has some sort of story.
Mm-hmm.
I think Shantae has just about enough character interactions and story to go along with.
I mean, it is a platformer though, so we'll see how that works.
It's more Metroidvania-y.
Like debatable.
Of Zelda.
I guess debatable.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway,
but sure.
She's just gaming like crazy at the moment, which is
That's
very
great.
Strange. Yeah.
Your gaming education beginning with Link Between Worlds is not a bad way to start. I have to say,
a pretty great start, I must say.
Great.
Good recommendation from us.
Yeah.
So I have also been playing the Puyo Tetris demo.
The word that is very hard to say, and I'm not even
Puyo,
sure what the way. Puyo. Who knows? It's
like,
Japanese.
Shall we translate it from Japanese? No, let's just leave it the way it is. Why not?
Yeah.
Let's just keep it the way. I've never really played. Jeez, this is difficult. Isn't it? I've never really
let's
played.
Let's just call it Tetris.
I've never really played Puyo, and this is where my pop shield is.
Exactly.
I'm just going to keep saying Puyo. Puyo. I've never played it, and I just thought this demo is fun. Me and Caroline can do like verses against each other, and that game is good fun. Like it's got a lot of Puyo, it's got a lot of Tetris. You can play as much of one or the other, and then you can combine them and play against each other in like a battle where one person is playing as Tetris and one's playing as Puyo. And it's just weird. My main criticism, in my view, we only played like 4, 5, 6 matches, and I found the problem was that, so in these sort of Tetris battle games or Puyo battle games, whatever you want to call them, you sort of are getting rid of blocks in order to like give blocks to your opponent. So
right, basically like throwing trash mobs onto the other screen.
Exactly. So if you're playing as Puyo and you defeat, like, you get rid of some blobs and then the Tetris player gets blocks, for me that punishment is a lot more devastating for the Tetris player than when the Tetris player clears lines, because the punishment for the Puyo player is that blocks come down on top of their structure,
right,
and actually don't they're easy to get rid of. They come down on top of the structure, and then you just simply have to blow up your Puyo blobs, whatever you call them, around that structure, and they vanish. And it's
right,
like,
because on Tetris it comes from below, so it's pushing you up and up toward the sky.
And I think Puyo it's a weird one. I always say that phrase. It's a weird one, but it's strange because Puyo, it feels to me like there's a lot of luck when you're there's luck and skill, I suppose, but when you're clearing lines of blobs that then make other blobs fall down, and you're going for multipliers essentially that punish your opponent way harder. Because in my view, in these versus puzzle games, the key is to clear lots at once to really hurt your enemy rather than gradually just firefighting essentially. So, you know, the obvious equivalent with Tetris is you just keep a nice clear block, a linear block down the side, and then that long linear block comes and bam, you clear 4 rows at once. So
right,
it's like that essentially. And so I was playing as Tetris, he was Puyo for a while, and I just got beaten like 2-3 times in a row fairly convincingly, and then we swapped, and I did beat her, but it took me a lot longer. And then we both played as Tetris, and it was a bit more traditional, and both played as Puyo. So that's a fun game. Like, it's very colourful. It's a very obvious thing to say, but I've never really gotten into puzzlers, and like whenever I've played Tetris, it's always been I don't think I've ever owned Tetris. Like, it's always been
you didn't
like,
own the Tetris on Game Boy, like the most sold version of that game?
no, and now I'm like regretting that I maybe didn't pick up, because there was like, Nintendo did some deal where Tetris went. They sold
it wasn't.
Tetris.
I believe it was to do with Ubisoft having the rights on Tetris in Europe or in some regions, and as a result, they had to basically rescind Tetris on Game Boy from the 3DS eShop. So if you had it, you've got it still, and you can still get it. Actually, I'm not even sure if you can re-download it, but if it's on your 3DS, you have it. Now it's gone from the eShop, so you just can't even get it anymore, which is quite frankly absurd. And I'm kind of gutted that I didn't get on it back in the day, because one of my first experiences with Game Boy was playing Tetris, and it was because I borrowed it from someone at school who basically lent it to me for like a week or two, and I basically, like, the only thing I had was Tetris, so I was just going ham on that. After that, eventually my sister got one, but I remember it being a very good version of it, despite having not really played much else before. But my dad was always a big Tetris fan, so I remember him playing a bit of it and enjoying that. So I picked up this demo as well and tried it out for a little while. I'm just fucking bad at Tetris. I suck. Yeah, and I think I just don't have the acuity for like predicting, not necessarily predicting, but keeping in mind what blocks are coming and making sure I have a pattern set up that is going to work for that. And I think maybe just because this is a battle style thing, I was playing against the CPU, I had the pressure mounting because of the stuff coming from below. And I kind of failed really bad. I didn't beat the CPU once. I played like 4 or 5 rounds. I was like, I can't do this. But I didn't try any of the Puyo stuff because I don't know. I'll pick it up again and give it a go. But
I think Tetris is better. Puyo's fun, but I don't know. Tetris is an older formula that works better. I don't know. This is me coming as like a puzzler noob, just sort of trying this game that combines two traditional puzzle games and thinking, this one's better than the other one. But it's cool, and I love that. I love that it's other that we've already played snipper clips, and this is like another thing we could just try where you take 2 Joy-Con, 1 each, and just play some multiplayer games. And like it actually works really well, and you don't have to think about any other controllers. It's all right there, and I really look forward to seeing what else can be done with that format with the Switch, like with co-op multiplayer.
Yeah, totally. Did you play it on the Switch screen itself or on the TV? Did you try it out?
We just played it on the TV, but yeah, then we'd have to use the stand, and no one wants to use the stand. So
no.
I'm not really massively a fan of that. Of just what do you call it when you're holding? What's the name of that?
What, just tabletop mode or whatever?
Tabletop mode, yeah. There we go. So yeah, I don't know.
I guess holding the Joy-Con sideways anyway is an interesting thing when it comes to Tetris, because you have to use analog control, right? You don't have a D-pad to drop things.
But
so
it feels okay because these analog sticks kind of have it's almost like they have a D-pad in them or something. Like, I don't know how you describe it, but they have you can really feel the 8 directions more so than, like, I would argue Wii U or a Wii analog stick on like a nunchuck or something. Like it's
not quite GameCube levels of having notches to tell you, but
but there's something in there that makes it feel different.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little stiffer of an analog stick than the Wii U one is, which I kind of prefer. I think the looseness is something that, especially on PS4, the analog sticks are very loose, and I'm not a huge fan of those. But it's I guess it works for some 2D stuff. But I've yet to play any like 2D platformers on Switch, so I haven't got to test like whether those buttons work as D-pad or whether I use analog stick. I don't know. But is that it? Then you played some.
That's Puyo Tetris. Very quickly, I've been playing the original F-Zero on my Wii U Virtual Console. Back to my roots. This game is. How do you describe it? It's one of those games I've been meaning to play for a very long time, really, because I'm such a big F-Zero fan. and we've not had F-Zero in such a long time, and it feels very strange to go back to where it all started, bearing in mind that this is like the first Mode 7 game, I believe, and was also a SNES launch game. So
right, it was Mario World and F-Zero with the 2 launch games.
Like a crazy launch lineup when you think about it. And it holds up fairly well. I think it feels an awful lot like the Game Boy Advance games, and very easily what this game has that the Game Boy Advance games don't is like the classic music and tracks. So we're talking Mute City, Big Blue, those matching theme songs. You got the Blue Falcon, like the Blue Falcon's not even in like the Game Boy Advance game.
Wait, are you kidding me? They don't have the Blue Falcon in that
No, they
game?
have this other something Falcon, and I swear, I might be wrong, I don't know where I'm getting this from, it's just in the back of my mind somewhere.
Okay.
But in the sort of F-Zero lore, that Falcon is like either his father or his son or something weird.
Okay.
I don't even know.
Well, I mean, there was like a manga and stuff for F-Zero, I recall.
So like,
there is some deep-seated lore going on with F-Zero. So,
but this game, it's cool. Like it works well, and I think the Game Boy Advance games handle an awful lot better than this game. And when I initially started playing it, I thought, I'll just have to get used to it. But then I played like a few hours worth, and I was kind of like, no, this really does feel like considerably less refined than the Game Boy Advance games.
Okay.
And it's just fascinating that with similar controls between, I guess, a SNES and a Game Boy Advance controls, they really managed to refine those controls into something that felt like a proper racing game, more so than the original F-Zero, I feel, with maximum velocity. Even though both of these games are like racing games with D-pads, which feels weird in and of itself.
I mean, we dealt with it with Mario Kart DS for a long time, so I'm no stranger to playing a racing game with a D-pad.
You see, Mario Kart DS is that's harder to go back to, I feel, than these F-Zeros in a weird way. Like it,
right? I mean, it is a 3D game, right? So
it is a 3D game, but there's something about F-Zero, that style of F-Zero game, and a D-pad that actually go together better than you think it would on paper.
Sure.
And obviously with the N64 version I've not played, GameCube F-Zero GX goes, you need an analog stick for that. It's just, there's no way you could even attempt to play that with a GameCube D-pad.
Sure. But I mean, the GameCube D-pad is garbage to begin with, so.
But in terms of a whole gaming package, I don't think it's the best F-Zero by a long way. It's probably the worst I've played, to be honest, but I'm still really glad I played it and have experienced it. And like, it felt almost like a history lesson as much as like, oh, I'm just going to play a game to enjoy it. I can't say I just naturally enjoyed this game. I thought large parts of it were very frustrating. I think it's a lot harder. Like all F-Zeros in my experience have rubber banding. I think this one has the worst rubber banding. It's also just has some really, really brutal tracks that F-Zero, like the format is the same as the Game Boy Advance games, but the format is so brutal where like you have to finish top 3, otherwise you're eliminated. Hitting off the sides constantly. The pit lanes in this game are so short. Like you recover about a third of your power bar with each pit lane you go in, and in the other games you're consistently getting half or like your whole power bar back in one. So it's just really, really brutal. It is still enjoyable. We've talked numerous times about where F-Zero goes in the future. What is going to happen? Like, is F-Zero just going to merge with Mario Kart? What is the future of the series? And I look forward to what could possibly happen on Switch. But it was fun to have a little history lesson and experience something I've been meaning to experience for a while. So yeah.
That's interesting that you bring up the difficulty, because to me, as someone who hasn't really played much F-Zero, when I came to the Super Nintendo game, because I got it as part of the 30th anniversary of the NES, I think it was, because they did a sale where it was like 30 pence for all these games, even though they included some Super Nintendo games. I played it and I was like, yeah, this is very hard, but that's what I know F-Zero is. So from me, from a layman's perspective of not having played the series, I just thought, yeah, this is just what these games are, right? And so it's interesting to hear you say that it actually is much more brutal and unforgiving than later entries in the series.
Yeah, not much more. I think GX is still the hardest by a country mile. But,
right. I mean, that game, it just, is known generally as having massive balance issues. So,
but compared to the Game Boy Advance games, I think the Game Boy Advance games have this learning curve that I went on and got much, much better at that game.
Right.
And I could make the game feel a lot more easy. Whereas this, I admit I didn't sink as many hours into this as I would have with the original Game Boy Advance games, but I didn't feel like I was getting better. Like, it was very turgid.
I feel like there's a very distinctive difficulty spike that happens in this game, because from what I recall playing through it, the first couple of races I was able to get through pretty okay. Like, they were kind of like ramping up, and the courses were not too harsh. Like, there weren't too many tight turns, and even if you did knock into the side, you would be able to recover yourself. And then I think it was the third race I hit where, like, multiple times in a row, there would be this one corner that just destroys you. If you make one mistake, you're just bouncing off the two sides, and you just blow up before you even know what's happened. And so I was playing on easy. Like, I was just going through the easiest difficulty, just trying to make my way. And by that point, I was like, I can't even finish this series of races.
Right.
Like, it basically stopped me short.
I mean, I beat all the GPs on beginner, but I was struggling with them on standard, and on Game Boy Advance, I was getting to expert and master on a lot of them. And I genuinely think that the expert and master of the Game Boy Advance games almost feel like the beginner and standard of this game. Like, it really felt like that. And I like the difficulty of F-Zero. I never want it to change from that. That is such a core part of the series, because what does the game force you to do with that corner that you were talking about? It forces you to
slow down,
to slow down, to get around at the right apex, to do what you need to do to survive,
to be good at a racing game. Essentially,
it forces you to be good at a racing game, and I like that, because it's very snobby, but it's very like
it's your wheelhouse, Like,
yeah, it's brutal, and it's great, and I love the theme. I absolutely love the futuristic.
Yeah.
The theme to the whole thing.
I do think it's a really good looking Super Nintendo game as well. Like, it has that Mode 7 is something that I think could have aged poorly, but I actually think it's aged rather elegantly. It is a deliberate trick of the eye, but I do think it's still effective, and it still gives you that sense of momentum and speed that I guess it was designed to do. So
yeah, and it almost had this strange renaissance with the Game Boy Advance and things like that, where almost all the driving games on that game use a similar system. So yeah, we want more F-Zero. Come back.
I mean,
please.
You do. I'll be all right, but we'll see.
NBZ.
Cool, and that's what you've been playing then.
That's lots of little niggly things. But
yeah, little bits and pieces.
What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I've been busy doing a lot of revision and stuff, so I haven't really dug deep into anything new or anything crazy. Kept playing Persona 5. I'm now 75 hours deep into that game, so I've slowed down in terms of the number of hours I'm putting into it. But it's still great. I'm still really enjoying it. The one thing I want to mention is tried out remote play on the PC, because I saw someone on NeoGAF posting some screenshots, and people were like, how the hell did you get those screenshots? Because Atlas, with their fucking asinine policies, have blocked all sharing functionality in Persona 5.
Wow.
So you can't stream it, and you can't post any screenshots. And the guy was like, oh, I was using the PC by kind of streaming it to this, and then kind of taking the screenshots from there. I'm like, oh, wait, right. Because I know remote play is a thing on Vita, and I've tried that, and it's not been great. And my PC, because it's wired up to Ethernet, it's not going through the Wi-Fi, I thought, hey, this might actually work out. So I downloaded the app. It's very simple to use. All you need to do is bring your DualShock 4 to plug into a USB slot on your PC, and it just sets it up for you. And I usually keep my PS4 in rest mode, because it's just like the Switch, where you just leave it sleeping, and as soon as you turn it on, you're right back into the game, which I think has been a game changer, honestly. And I think it's one of those features that not many people talk about discussing the PS4, but rest mode is amazing. Like, it actually takes so much time that would be wasted if I were to usually be playing a game, and cuts it out completely. I think a lot of the barrier to entry I have with consoles when I want to sit down and play one is, okay, I've got to wait for this to boot up, got to open the thing, got to go into it, it's going to take time, and then I'm into my game much later than I want to be. One of the things I've loved about Switch and the things I kind of like about handhelds is you can just pop them open and you're there much faster, in my opinion. And so rest mode has just been fantastic for that. But because it's in rest mode, I can essentially turn it on from my PC. So it activates and it just pops up in a small window. And there is definitely issues with this stuff because it's streaming through the internet. You're not going to get great quality. So far, the frame rates haven't dipped too badly. And I think especially because Persona 5 is an RPG, it doesn't affect the game that much. Like, it's not to do with Twitch movement. Like, this isn't Horizon. If I was playing Horizon, there's no way I would stream it to my desktop because the input latency isn't bad, but it's noticeable enough to where I would be frustrated by, like, actual proper combat. Whereas in a game like this, you're just picking things from a menu, and you are running around dungeons, and that kind of has some effect on certain aspects. But for the most part, you aren't really engaging that like directly, so it doesn't matter if the frame rate drops a couple times here and there. But I think the biggest hit is the resolution, and I was running it in a smaller window, so I didn't notice it as much. If it's full screen, it definitely, you can see the distinctive drop down. Like, it doesn't even look as good as like 720p or something. It's a significant hit, but as a convenience, I found it really useful. I've only done it the last couple of days, but I was previously going next door and like playing on the very small TV in there, and now I'm just like, I'll just sit here because I've got a dual monitor set up for the moment, because my mum bought a monitor for herself, and I'm kind of commandeering it at the moment to try out a dual screen setup, and it's amazing, and I really love doing this with my PC now. E3 is going to be fantastic because I can have a full screen of a conference and TweetDeck on the other side, so I can see everything people are saying as well as watching full screen. So I'm psyched about that. But yeah, it's been great. I was watching the Kind of Funny morning show like on one monitor and had Persona going on the other. And because I'm going through a dungeon, I'm not really paying attention to any story stuff. It's very much like going through enemies and like figuring out light puzzles. So it works to perfection. And it's the sort of thing where if I went next door, I mean, I could put on a podcast and listen to that, but it's not the same as having these two screens and sitting here in a space that I kind of am more comfortable in. So yeah, for those purposes, it's been pretty great. And it's the sort of thing where when I get to a major story sequence or whatever, I'm going to go to the actual TV because I want to see everything look nice. But as far as remote play goes, I think there are certain games it works with, and this is certainly one of them. It definitely helps me get through it because, it's a lot of hours to put into a game like this. Aside from that, I jumped back into Titanfall 2 again. It's one of those things, Bally. Yeah, I said, like, when Titanfall 2 came out, because I remember I played a lot of Titanfall 1. I loved that game. It was the game that kind of brought me into the fold with online, like, first-person shooters. I still think the original is a fantastic game, but I think 2 is, like, I think it's been cemented as my favorite online game of all time. And that's discounting playing Smash Brothers against you, because that's a very different kind of experience.
Thank God.
Right?
I was
but
worried
if you're talking about just going into a lobby with random people and playing, there is nothing better than Titanfall 2 in my opinion. It feels so fucking incredible to move, and I just love the fluidity of the combat, and I wanted to just keep playing it because it's one of those things. I think a lot of times we move on from games and we leave them behind and we don't go back, and I'm like, I keep intending this year, kept telling myself, I need to go back to Titanfall 2. I've got to go back because I want to see what they're doing with the updates. There's still a decent player community on PC, surprisingly. Like, there was like 2,000 people on a couple of nights ago, and that was before they dropped the new DLC map that just came out. And I was like, okay, so this is actually relatively healthy player base, despite the fact that they put it out at a bad time and it was up against Battlefield and Call of Duty, and it didn't sell particularly well. It has a hardcore community who are really into it, and I want to keep going back to it because it's definitely one of those things that the first Titanfall I didn't regen in, and what regenning is essentially prestiging in Call of Duty, which is where you hit level 50 and then you reset back to level 1 so that you can keep leveling up and getting, I guess, the dopamine hit of getting experience every time. It's one of those things where by level 50 you have everything unlocked, and it's like, it doesn't like make much sense to go back to level 1 because you lose a lot of these things that you've got. But if you're just playing on level 50, you're not getting that little hit of, hey, I'm getting something for doing every match, right? And And it's the way they design these systems. But I regened the other night, and I'm like, okay, great, back doing that. I'm up to like level 10 on my second regen, and then they just put out a new DLC map, which is really fucking cool. I think it's one of the best maps they've done so far. It's so wall run oriented to the point where you could probably cross from one side to the other without touching the ground if you were smart about it. And that's incredible, because the momentum you have when you kind of hit the wall running, get some speed up, go to the other one, jump between them. There are some really cool puzzles between in the single player campaign that uses that stuff. But having a map like that really focuses on it, I thought was really smart. So I played a bit of that today. But yeah, I'm back in, and this is my podcast game for the moment, because I'm trying to burn through some stuff, and it has helped tremendously. It's one of those things where you would think that Persona would be really good to have a podcast on the background for, because it's just grinding through enemies sometimes. But as a result of that system, figuring out weaknesses and downing enemies and like knowing what to do and heal and doing buffs and debuffs, you're actually focusing on the game enough to where I'm not actually hearing the podcast clearly. Whereas with Titanfall, it's enough of a Twitch game that it's more your fingers take over and your brain isn't really engaging in that way. It's a very different style. It's kind of like, when I pick up my guitar and I play something, it's all muscle memory, essentially. Like, I'm not actually thinking about playing the thing I'm playing. My fingers are just acting because I've done it so many times. And I think shooters kind of have that element to them where you're kind of, you can concentrate on something.
You can satisfy one half of your brain with one action you're doing, and the other half of your brain with another action you're doing.
Exactly, yeah. So that's been great, and I'm really enjoying it. So, but yeah, aside from that, it's nothing new right now. I just want to finish Persona 5 really, and then I'll try moving on to something else. I want to, it's a big game. Got to get I got a big backlog, Bally.
Shorter for a change?
No, I will. I'll find something on Steam probably that I'll bash through, or maybe I'll pick up a Switch eShop game, because there've been quite
there's been a few
recently
that have sort of floating around that had decent reviews.
Yeah, I don't know. The one thing that's really putting me off with these Switch versions is a lot of them are having frame rate issues. Like Snake Pass apparently is bad in terms of like the frame rate stuff. Mr. Shifty, I was listening to RFN, and James Jones was like
completely saying it's unplayable.
Yeah, which is awful. And like, if I have the option to play the PC version, the portability is great on Switch, but I'm sorry, it's one of those things where frame rate matters a huge deal to me. And if it's dropping every now and again, that's okay. But when it's this bad, like, no, I can't forgive that.
And they were making the argument on RFN that if you can update Breath of the Wild to not have frame rate issues, and it's like this ridiculously huge open world game, but then games like Snake Pass are struggling, you're just worried that like the developers just aren't optimizing it in the right way,
Yeah. It may be like, not breathing problems, but
teething problems.
Teething problems, thank you, Bally. The system is new, and I guess developers, I don't know how much time developers have had to work with the system, right? Because Nintendo were very late on announcing it, and there were some people who got dev kits late, and just even software coming out now is just a little bit janky. So I do hope that their pipeline improves over the next year or so, and that we don't get these bad versions, because I would preferably play all these games on Switch because of the portability. Right. But if there are drawbacks like that, then it makes me think again. So we'll see. But I hope there's some cool stuff coming out. I mean, Mario Kart's coming out for most people who will eat that up. But we've played that game, so it's gonna pass me by. There are things happening in the near future of Switch. So I'll keep an eye out and I'll keep you all posted. But that's basically going to wrap us up for the first segment. Don't go anywhere, however, because we are going to be back with some emails after the break. See you in a bit.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. It is part 2 and that means it is time for your listener emails. We always need more. We are running out. We say this all the time, but we kind of are running out this time. So
we're kind of digging into the depths of the inbox right now. We're going back onto things that we missed a while ago. So, some fresh juice would help us out for sure.
Exactly. We've got some old emails, but before I get into our first email, I must remind you of the address to send us new emails, which of course is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Please send them in. So, our first email is from Chaotix, who's from England. Hi, I'm Zed and Bally. I've recently been watching Go 8-Bit, a show where comedians attempt to play video games against each other. The show has its ups and downs, an expert who doesn't know the name of Sonic Spin Dash, and an obvious hole in the content of games being shown. We are 5 episodes in at this point, and there have been no Nintendo games played. There have been references to Nintendo franchises, but none of their staple games. The Wii has shown up for some of the games that have been played. My discussion point: why is this? My theories: number 1, Nintendo has disallowed their content to be used the same way that they ban YouTube videos for playing their games, missing out on the free marketing. When do you think this policy will change for Nintendo and they realize it's advantageous for not making proper games? This is a fallacy that several think, even though there are several great games out there for Nintendo. As you know, this relates to comedian routines from the host where Wii games don't count due to the casual nature of the Wii. However, mobile games have shown up on the show, such as Temple Run. When will society realize that Nintendo is still a gaming force to be reckoned with? Keep up the podcast and work on the YouTube channel. Chaotix from England.
Well, a charged email, perhaps, to be sure. And I think relevant that, this is the UK, and we can talk about that because I think there is definitely a perception thing that Nintendo has going on within our country of origin, which is interesting. But clearly, Bally, I don't know if you've seen any of Go 8-Bit. I certainly haven't, but I know that it is hosted by Dara Breen, who's a comedian who he also hosts the UK Video Game BAFTA Awards, and I think he generally does an okay job there. It's interesting because he's a celebrity who knows about video games, but I wouldn't say he is as deep in them as some may imagine. He probably gets sent stuff by press copies and things like that, like kind of the level of maybe a Jonathan Ross or something, because I know he's kind of into video games, like Jimmy Fallon, like a lot of these kind of TV show hosts who profess their love for it, but they have maybe a middling knowledge. So I don't think that or maybe this expert he mentions not knowing the name of Sonic Spin Dash is someone else, but yeah, I think Dara Breen is more there as, hey, he's a really good host and he's kind of tangentially related to games, so that's why he's attached.
I think I've seen like an advert for this program, and it was, I believe it's on Sky. So I don't know. Sky tends to get sort of lower views than obviously your mainstream channels in the UK, especially sort of Sky 1, Sky 2, that sort of thing. So it's around there. I can just sort of imagine what this show, the way this show pans out, and I don't know. As for like, do you think Nintendo are purposefully keeping their games away from a show like this, or is it a decision by the producers?
This is very weird because I think in previous things like this, I remember, I don't know if you remember, Bally, but there was this show, I believe it was on Sky back in the day when we were quite young, that was a video game based show where they had people on, like kids or teenagers, whatever, applying to be on the show, and it was like video game challenges, and they would like have segments, sometimes kind of review stuff. And I for the life of me can't remember what it was called, but it was this kind of like, hey, it's very much based around
Gamesville
competition. Maybe I don't remember, but it was.
I watched that on Sky. That was pretty.
Yeah,
fun.
It was like these two kind of young guys. I recall it very vaguely, but I do remember there being Nintendo games on there from time to time. I think they played like Smash Brothers. I think they played Mario Kart Double Dash. So I feel like this stuff has been allowed previously in shows. It's obviously it has to do with licensing, and they have to go to the copyright holder to be like, hey, we're going to use this on television. Like, I imagine it's probably even harder holes to jump through than even, YouTube stuff, because it's the Wild West on the internet. But I don't feel like it's necessarily something that Nintendo would go out of their way to ban? Because that honestly feels like, hey, we're just going to say no to this marketing opportunity. But then you look at it from Nintendo's perspective, and they a lot of the time make these weird decisions where you're like, well, obviously other companies would make this decision to promote their brand, but they're not. So it's one that I can't really with certainty say. And this email was sent a while ago, so the program has had episodes since then. So maybe they have shown Nintendo games by this point. I'm not up to date, so I couldn't really comment.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I like this versus YouTube. It's hard to say, but it's definitely easy to say popular Nintendo are in the UK, and arguably like stigmas against Nintendo are often strongest in the UK. And we've mentioned this a number of times on the show before, but this idea that you're right, Chaotix, where it's this idea that Nintendo don't make proper games, like that there are these big open world games that Nintendo decide, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're just going to do our two-dimensional platformers, which take less money, less time, and fewer developers.
Yeah, totally.
Describe it as, and it's simply not true. Like Breath of the Wild just came out. It's like one of the most in-depth open world games ever. So it's a
I think at this point in time especially, so there are different eras of Nintendo in the UK where I think you can kind of trace a version of a stigma that kind of is a through line. So back in the day, obviously, with NES, Super Nintendo didn't do that well in the European market. Maybe they probably did well in other European countries, but in the UK, the competition between Sony later on and then obviously earlier with Sega was a lot harder for them. So they didn't have a stronger foothold in the market as, say, the NES did in North America, which led to less kids being exposed to Nintendo at a young age. I think, honestly, if the Game Boy hadn't existed, I don't know that we would have been exposed to Nintendo back then, right? Because Pokemon was really kind of, I think that was the one thing that allowed them to break through somewhat into that market, was having the handheld space to themselves and being able to leverage this television show with Pokemon and these card game things going on. Like, the way I really got into games was via Pokemon as a medium. And so I think that was kind of their way through there. But even then, like, you look at something like Pokemon, and it is viewed as incredibly childish and for a younger audience, and that is a stigma that I think they carried on throughout later generations. You take a look at the GameCube versus the PS2, and most people owned a PS2, and I think a lot of the reason was you looked at the GameCube lineup and it had a kiddie image to it. Like, Mario was very colourful, and Wind Waker was very cartoonish. It was not kind of the stuff you were seeing like Grand Theft Auto on these other platforms. And as a result, Nintendo had to pick up, this perception that they were for a young crowd, for people who didn't really engage with games deeply. Like that, it was one of those things that continued on through the Wii because of the casual nature of it, and obviously the Wii U was such a failure that no one really even knew what it was, let alone gave it the time of day. So I think from that GameCube generation onwards, in those three consoles, it has been a progression from, hey, we're a child's toy, to, hey, we're for casual people who no one really cares about, to, hey, no one even knows we exist, right? So it's been, I feel, this weird downward trend over time, and therefore the UK has kind of paid less attention to them.
It should do on paper, but it's easy to say a system should sell when it might not sell. And in the grand scheme of things, the UK is not really the biggest market that Nintendo needs to worry about when you compare it to Japan, the rest of Europe, and obviously North America. So it's not like, when will society realize that Nintendo's a force to be reckoned with? It's kind of, how does Nintendo market themselves where they move away from arguably being a more kiddie image, or certainly under the Wii era, a more casual image, which was the entire image of the Wii that made it sell so well, and kind of made it clash so much with the Wii U when you think about how little the Wii U as a system just appeals to a casual market.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think when you look at the Switch promotion stuff, and especially the very first trailer, it's kind of trying to unleash the shackles on that stuff and focus on an older audience, creating a product that is much sleeker, more kind of modern looking, and I wonder how that does. I think the Switch has sold double what the Wii U did in its opening week in the UK, which I think that went from like 40,000 to 80,000, which, in the grand scheme of things, not too significant. But maybe it tells us something. I'm not sure if it tells us anything, honestly, because we need to wait and see how it goes. But I don't know. It's a weird space that Nintendo find themselves in, because I think, people paint them as this company who make games for younger people, but then you have people coming around in their late 20s when they have nostalgia hit them, like, oh yeah, I really like Mario Kart, and then the new Mario Kart comes out and they jump on board. So this show, it's called Go 8-Bit. I don't know how much of a focus they have on retro games, seemingly not a huge amount if they're showing mobile games on the show, and they have like other stuff going on, but I think that if we're talking about like kind of modern Nintendo, either people don't know about the Wii U or kind of not engaged, right. And so they're not really going to use those games on the show. And the other reasons with Nintendo not really being that big in the UK also makes sense. Even in this email, he mentions like Sonic Spin Dash. Like Sonic is probably I doubt it actually. Sonic's not more well known than Mario is, but I feel Sonic has.
He might be in the UK.
No, I don't think he is. I honestly don't. I think Mario is too big of a brand worldwide for that to change at this point. But he's certainly relatively successful here, I think. So. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things where I see these things happening where they try and put video games on television, and I think, no. What are you doing? You're going backwards. And it's absolutely the case that video games live in the medium of the internet, and that's why Jeff Keighley made his show a Twitch live stream. He broke away from G4. He got out of Spike TV. He didn't want to deal with the corporate advertorial, all this bollocks that, he still has that on his show because he needs to make a lot of money to make it, but I feel it's maybe a little less obnoxious than it used to be. And when the companies start going and being like, oh, we need to get the kids watching TV again, we got to do these video games, it's like, the kids don't watch TV anymore, so you're kind of trying a dead market.
I would almost argue that a title like Go 8-Bit, they're trying to appeal to an audience that went 8-bit, and that they're now in their sort of 40s, 50s, etc.,
I guess the kind of audience that's still watching television.
Right, exactly, more likely to watch TV. And I think you're right, the games media know, Jeff Keighley knows that like the vast majority of people playing the vast majority of video games are in their 20s and 30s right now, and for those reasons it's all accessible online and nothing to do with the television, which is good because we like that. We don't like TV. We like viewing stuff online.
We're a podcast. We thrive by being on the internet. So
exactly that's another very good.
Maybe
reason.
Slightly biased, but
slightly biased. Our next email is from Ricardo, who's from the internet. Hello, NBZ and Bally. I have the feeling that Nvidia and Nintendo's partnership will go a little further than just providing the Tegra X2. I think that GeForce Now, or the Nintendo version of it, will be available for the Switch. This will ensure that no matter the graphical power of the Switch, current and future gen games will be available on the console via streaming. I currently own a Shield tablet that is capable of using GeForce Now, and let me tell you, if you have the internet speeds and Wi-Fi requirements, games play as smooth and beautiful on my $299 tablet as in my $1,500 custom-built PC. What do you guys think? Will Nintendo ever consider incorporating a monthly subscription platform like GeForce Now? Love the show. Sincerely, Ricardo.
Again, maybe something that we need to correct here because this email is a little old. The Tegra X2 is not what is used in the Switch. It's the Tegra X1, which is a weaker version of that chip. But I thought I'd just point that out because people are probably going to be like, it's out of date information, but there you go. So this is an interesting question because I think the last couple of days there was a thread popping up on NeoGAF and Reddit and places like that about this guy who is currently working on an application which would be available on consoles, probably through internet browsers, and on the Switch, accordingly to him, through the eShop, which would essentially allow you to stream PC games from your computer directly to the Switch. Now, everyone in that thread and a lot of people online are saying Nintendo is in no way in hell going to allow this to happen because, especially if you have something like, say, Mr. Shifty, which is available on Switch, on the eShop, or it's available on Steam, if you have the internet speed requirements, why wouldn't you get the Steam version? Because it runs at 60 frames per second. It doesn't have these frame drops that the Switch version is supposedly having. And if it is a decent way to play it, that would compromise Nintendo and their kind of, their bottom line. But then you can also say, well, hey, how many people actually own a big, powerful PC, and how many people have the internet speeds required to stream all this stuff? Does it matter that much? But honestly, I think as cool as that idea is, it's very likely going to get shut down, and Nintendo are not going to be able to allow things like that on their platform. If they were to do it, they would do it through their own means, and it would be through their own system. And I doubt they'd allow PC games to be streamed on the Switch. But I don't know, this guy seems to think that he can get a version on the eShop, and I don't know. You look at the eShop, and there are some games on Wii U which you're like, how the fuck did this get past approval? Like, it's this stupid shit like Meme Run, which is literally just like JPEGs thrown into a shitty runner game that is like, you would imagine a Flash game would be better than it, but it happens. So, and I think this is weird that it's been brought to Nintendo's attention a bit more by this guy kind of publicly announcing it, whereas if he hadn't said anything, he maybe would have gotten it through. So maybe they're kind of more on the lookout now. I'm not sure, but I think the app is called Rainway, so if you're interested in looking stuff up about it, that's happening. But I don't know, Bally, how do you feel about this notion of streaming stuff from one thing to another? Do you think it's a possibility for games in the future? Do you think Nintendo could use it at some point?
I think it absolutely is a possibility in the future. It's feeling like it's one of those arguments where Nintendo would be last to the party on something like this, because this benefits far more from either having higher technology, investing more in the technology within the system, and in the same way that you can argue VR has developed, Nintendo almost last to the party on VR in the same way I could imagine they would be last to the party on something like this. Having said that, you're right, because ultimately the Wii U is streaming between and it's using very different technology. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's not wireless, obviously. It's using technology that is streaming between the Wii U box and the gamepad, and there's very few things in the market now or then that are like the Wii U gamepad in that sense. So I think that Nintendo would like to do something using that technology, but ultimately the evolution of that technology was the Switch. So it's difficult where they can see themselves fit into this sort of conundrum.
Yeah, and it's also, they don't like to play with others, right? They are very much a closed ecosystem, and so I can't imagine. And it's weird, actually, because the Switch Pro controller actually does work on PCs pretty well, but I think that's just a case of it being Bluetooth enabled, so it's probably easy for you to just hook that up. But generally, Nintendo hardware, it doesn't like to play with other stuff. You don't want to have any kind of interconnection like you do. And I mean, Microsoft have incentive to do this, but the whole Play Anywhere thing with Xbox is, hey, you buy it on Xbox One, you get it on PC as well. And that's interesting because I think Microsoft have identified that these are two different markets they're serving, and they're not going to compete with one another. And I actually think that most people who own a gaming PC, they're more likely to own a Nintendo Switch than they are an Xbox or a PlayStation, because first of all, it gives you something completely different with the portability, and second of all, Nintendo have a much wider variety and stronger lineup of first-party titles than their other two competitors do. So if you're playing all your third-party stuff on PC, you're generally going to be complementing it with a Nintendo product, right? And so I don't know if there is any loss that Nintendo have from engaging with the PC space in some way, because it could maybe lead to more people wanting to buy a Switch. Like, for example, someone who is a core PC gamer and decides, hey, I want a way to play my games portably. Well, if you buy the Nintendo Switch, you can stream all your games there, but also you get access to this amazing lineup of first-party titles. Like, they could leverage that in that way. I don't think they're smart enough to do that, but there's a possibility for it in there. So, yeah, it's interesting, and I think it needs to be done right, because when it's not done right, it can be an experience that is not worth the hassle to do. So, for example, I've been playing a lot of Persona 5, and the TV is at a cost at the moment because, family are using it. I can get in there sometimes, I can't sometimes. So I tried to use my PlayStation Vita as a proxy by which to play Persona 5 through the Remote Play app. And what I found is that my Wi-Fi is not strong enough. It's either my Wi-Fi is not strong enough, or the connection and the Wi-Fi chips from the Vita and the PS4 are not in themselves powerful enough to push it out and give it to me without any kind of lag or any kind of loss in the image quality. There's always going to be a sacrifice on that end, which means that you're getting a suboptimal experience. And so I think ultimately, if this technology is going to go forward and work, it needs to be iterated on and be improved upon. And, I don't know how good these GeForce Nvidia Shields are, and I don't think they're even selling them anymore in that old version, which was essentially what the Nintendo Switch is. But, not really. It's just a streaming device that connects to your PC. But yeah, I don't know, how good that stuff looks comparative, but it's a possibility for the future. And I think we're going to reach a point where the internet is ubiquitous enough and fast enough. Maybe, we'll see. I don't know. All these fucking corporations' interests and everything get muddled into the mix, especially in North America, where you have all these very few companies that own all the internet and can leverage that in a horrible way. But I hope we get to a point where the internet, becomes a entity that can be used to just do this, because it's likely that in the future, how Netflix has become the de facto way that people watch movies, and streaming services are just by nature now the largest part of that industry. Everything's going to go that way, and eventually we're not going to all have to have massive desktop PCs. We're all going to have these very slimline things that we can just pop out and play anything just through the internet. That's very lofty and very far away, but that's where it's going, I think. So anyway, I think I just kind of got off course there.
I mean, whenever you talk about the future and these sort of grand ideas, you realize how far there is to go. And I think one very immediate way in which I thought there was a long way to go was when I put on PlayStation VR, and I realized this is very expensive for a very grainy experience. Yeah. And the sort of cost versus experience analysis of something like VR, there's a long way to go. And you're right, people need to be connected online. They have to have high-speed internet. Costs of stuff like chips, lithium batteries, these sorts of things obviously always keep falling. And you just compare the gamepad of the Wii U to something like the Switch, and you're already thinking, wow, costs are getting cheaper and technology is getting smaller. So I don't mean to sound like an old dad saying, "Oh, technology is always getting smaller," because
back in my day, the Game Boy was size of my I don't know, my radio. Yeah, exactly. So lots of speculation, but I don't know. I think that we'll see how Nintendo does. I'm very curious about this app and whether it gets on or not. I highly doubt it will, but if it does, I'm going to be singing hallelujah, because that's something that I really would love. I think part of the reason the PC is something a lot of people get backlogged on is because the PC is used for so many things, and I use mine for watching videos and editing and all this other stuff. Playing games on it is great, and it is the best way to play games, I think, modern day, but it's also an inconvenient way to play games. The Switch is, for me, the most convenient, just having it in my hand. So if I were to be able to stream all these great indies to my Switch, that'd be great, because I have fucking hundreds of them on Steam that are unplayed right now. But we'll see.
So our final question this week is from James, who's from the internet. One of the issues making a Metroid is that it has an ongoing story and timeline, and thus specific points they can fill. Really, given the manga is canon, the only place left are post-Federation Force, which would be Metroid Prime 4, and post-Fusion, which would presumably be the 2D game. Fusion leaves us with a clear next step in the outro that Samus is court-martialed, giving two distinct possibilities. 1, Samus is a fugitive, or 2, Samus is being punished and probably imprisoned. The next logical step of the story is also Samus dealing with the corruption within the Federation that greenlit the research done in Fusion. Essentially what I'm saying is that the next 2D Metroid will deal heavily with the Federation, thus explaining Federation forces' existence to cement their presence, and probably some form of escape and evasion. Either she's on the run or an escaped prisoner, which actually allows a sense of isolation even on an inhabited planet. As such, it seems pretty clear to me that the next 2D Metroid must have some form of stealth mechanic. Do you think such a thing would be innovative enough to stand out? And moreover, do you think it would be a positive step in the series? I think there are several existing power-ups that could be used for interesting stealth sections. Using bombs as a distraction, the spider ball to avoid lines of sight, or even ZSS's
Zero Suit Samus
paralyzer. Good point, Emmy. I should have got that. Zero Suit Samus's paralyzer, possibly retrofitted into a paralyzer beam, and of course the wave beam to paralyze guards that can't even see you, but would also open up a number of new power-up options to surprise people. Silent and EMP bombs, maybe some way of turning off lights, and of course some sort of chameleon suit upgrade for the end game when you're meant to feel really powerful. I also think it could add in ways to the tension in the exploration, giving very open areas with soft barriers in terms of surveillance, but equally I don't know how well they'd be able to balance it with the fast-paced action the series enjoys. What are your thoughts, James from the internet?
Oh boy, a lot of speculation going on here. He goes deep into this stuff. This is really...
He really has
this is thought out.
an imagination that can just take a theory that a game developer just loves.
Yeah, no, totally. So one thing I'm going to say up front is the notion that they have to stick to a timeline is just not a thing that Nintendo think about. I know that there is a timeline for Metroid and that it has some kind of sketched together way. It's not as sketched together as Zelda is. Zelda is just kind of like, well, we just kind of made this up and we're going on the fly. Like, I think Metroid actually has a more cohesive timeline to it. But the way Nintendo operate is they go for mechanics first and then they figure out a way to forge in a story. So I don't think that there are kind of limited steps that they have to force themselves down in order to create a new game in the Metroid franchise. That said, I think that this is a cool idea. The notion of having stealth as a focus in the series would be interesting. I think, we've talked before in the past how stealth has never been a true focus of any Nintendo games, where they use it throughout a lot of their franchises. I know, Bally, you weren't a big fan of the kind of escape Zero Suit Samus segment at the end of Zero Mission. How do you feel about them potentially taking this as a core element in a new 2D Metroid?
I like the idea. I just think it needs to be done well. Right. Because I'd read a lot of reviewers who liked and praised that section at the end of Zero Mission, and I just thought it. And I said this at the time when we did our backlog club, but essentially I thought it was more hit and run than stealth.
Sure.
In the sense that I think there were things about that could have been better. But do I have faith in Nintendo or whoever would take the next Metroid project on in making a better stealth, even two-dimensional experience? Absolutely. Like I would always have faith that something like that can be improved. And I think the suggestions James has made with all the weapons and paralyzer beams and things like this, spider ball to avoid line of sights, these are all fantastic ideas. And like the Metroid universe is very impressive in taking like an alien like world and running going crazy with all these crazy weapons that do all these different things. And that's where merging that craziness with a stealth game would be really great, because so far we've done a lot of isolation. So 2D and 3D, there's a lot of isolation, a lot of exploring, a lot of puzzle solving, but at the same time there's sort of a lot of big bosses. They're a huge part of Metroid, but a more of an emphasis on isolation in relation to stealth is interesting. And I like the idea that James had where you can feel very isolated in a busy city when the idea is to stay hidden from those people or that population. Like that's an interesting idea that you could really do a lot of interesting story stuff with to do with Metroid.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things where you have these elements in other Metroid games, like so this kind of survival horror element from Fusion, where the SAX is tracking you and you have to either run from it or hide from it in certain scenarios, and that stuff is terrifying because the SAX is just a monster that will annihilate you in like 2 hits if you let it. And then obviously the stealth sections in Zero Mission, and I don't think the Prime games really get to that sort of stuff because in a 3D game it's much harder to conjure those sort of feelings. I think there are a lot of 3D stealth games out there, and I've never really been one to be interested in those because for me, I think there are some that do it well. Like Metal Gear Solid 5 does it incredibly well because it gives you all this information you need and it allows you to do your job of stealth without intervening and without kind of doing a fuck you and kind of getting you in a cheap way, I think. And that's one of the things I don't like about some stealth games. They don't really display the information, allow you to get through things through your own skill. It just kind of fucks you up sometimes. But that said, like if you take those elements and boil them down into a more of a focus on that as a main part of the game, it could be very interesting. And I always talk about, and I always try to evangelize this game wherever I can, Mark of the Ninja. Amazing 2D stealth game, and one of the things that I love about it is that it very clearly indicates to you, here are where the people are, here are their lines of sight, here's where you're going to be completely hidden, here's a place where you're maybe in danger. You have a lot of tools in your arsenal, and the one thing about that game is it's a level-based game, right? So you're going through these multiple areas and you're figuring out the way to get past everyone. I would love to see that kind of design approached with a Metroid-like map implemented, because along the way, you get your upgrades and you become stronger, and maybe the whole idea of it is the inverse of Zero Mission, where in that game, like you build up, you get more powerful, and then they depower you. Whereas in this one, you start very depowered, and I don't know how many stealth games there are where you have that progression from stealth to full action where you can kind of go out there and be crazy without dying super easily. But there's a potential for that, and it kind of fits into the Metroid idea of Samus gets stronger throughout the game. I don't know. It's
exactly.
It's possible, but I'd also like to see maybe if they just kept the stealth going the whole time and leverage more challenging situations with more enemies and that kind of stuff. But I'm someone who has been hankering for a new 2D Metroid for so many years, and anything they give me, honestly, I'll take. So if they try to innovate a little bit and maybe take this idea on board, then I'm all for it. Because it's hard, I think. I think Nintendo have this problem of what do we do with the next Metroid, and this is a potential way to address that. So yeah, I hope we'll get something.
I guess we'll find out at E3.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. It's guaranteed,
Fingers crossed.
Guaranteed. It has to be there. It's Metroid.
It's guaranteed.
Oh boy.
How could you possibly doubt it?
Yeah. So yeah, that wrap us up for the email segment then, I guess, Bally?
I think so. Yeah, it's always depressing talking about 2D Metroid, isn't it? It kind of leaves you on the downer.
It's never depressing, Bally.
Yeah.
It just makes me happy.
They've not done that in a while.
2D Metroid. I love talking about it, but then the realization hits, and then it sets in.
Yeah. Oh god. Then it's a low.
Yeah.
It's a low. But yeah, that is all we've got time for in terms of your emails this episode. Of course, the email address is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Like we said at the top of the segment, we would love some more emails. That's all we got time for. I should say. I'm not just taking.
Oh, geez, Bally. It's going to be the Bally show for the next segment.
It's the Bally show. So we will see you after the break. Don't go anywhere for part 3.
Alright everyone, welcome back to the third and final part of the show. This week, we've been chatting a little bit about that NES, that Super NES, and some of our feelings about those mini consoles and about a potential new mini console. So Bally, we're going to lead things off with an email, which you have right there.
We have an email from friend of the show, Fizz, who's from California. Now this email's quite old, so he's referencing some stuff from a while ago.
Some beef.
He's got some beef, let's put it that way. This last podcast made me furious. While NBZ claimed Mario 3 was a good game, he really took a crap on it and claimed it throws out giant fuck yous. This isn't what made me mad, but it was when hearing this I got a flashback to Tropical Freeze, and it's the exact same thing I felt playing that game. Couldn't get momentum, and it taught you to beat the level by killing you first, and that's how it seemed to produce difficulty. The only thing that made me more furious than that was that Simpsons Hit and Run made your list of 30 GameCube games you'd put on a collection. Come on, that game was dreadful. But really, I jest. Before that segment, I thought of this question, and it's kind of in the same vein as the GameCube collection. But since you two are void of any nostalgia for the 8 and 16-bit eras, I would love to hear a list of top 20 from those combined eras, meaning NES and SNES. At this point, I'm not sure you could make it to 20 games you two actually like, but give it a whirl. Despite our constant differing opinions on classic games, I love you two a whole bunch and would love to come back on the show anytime. Thanks, boys. Fizz from California.
Of course, the invitation is always extended to come back on the show and to rake us over the coals for our various opinions. So thanks, Fizz. Yeah, let's dig into this a little bit because something that I struggled with at the time when playing Mario 3 was trying to express why. Why did I not like it? What was it that was annoying me and not making me believe that this is a all-time great game? And I think the one thing I came down to was surprise. I think that's the thing that kind of clutched it for me. Was I think about that game, and a lot of it is it's very visually similar, and a lot of things are concepts that are built upon later that just become more and more complex. So you'll have like airship levels, which then later just become the same thing. They look the same, but they're harder. They have more things thrown in them. They're much more difficult. And ultimately, I think my favorite world in Mario 3 was World 4, which is kind of the big small thing. It's the same thing you have in Mario 64, where you have a big tiny island. But it's, Mario is tiny and these enemies are massive. And that was a surprise to some degree, because, I haven't really played through this game before. I think I'd heard of that section in the past, but it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is cool and it's neat and it's doing something different. And ultimately, I didn't feel like the rest of the game gave me that injection of something that surprised me and took me aback, right? Like, I just thought it was not improving, but like kind of building on the concepts that had come before. And the difference I have with that and Tropical Freeze, which I agree to some degree with Fizz, that yeah, Tropical Freeze has a particular fuck you design. The thing with Tropical Freeze is, it obviously has modern conveniences. Like, you don't have to get sent back to these older worlds if you die, and you have multiple lives that you can take advantage of. You can buy lives if you want. You have like 4 hits potentially between Diddy or Dixie and Donkey Kong himself.
I don't think the game necessarily tricks you like Mario 3 does.
Yeah, I think it actually does a better job with level design and foreshadowing things, although I may be raked over the coals for saying that, because, there's probably stuff in Mario 3 that is incredibly smart as well, and, I would be remiss to say that. But the thing with that game that impressed me was it is so diverse in its look and its theming. And obviously Mario 3 can't go that far because it's this 8-bit game and it can only work with so much. And I guess, for the NES, it does its best to do that. But just as someone playing it in 2016 when I did, it doesn't have the same joy and surprise that I imagine it did back in the day. And I look at other older games and I do see that stuff happening. I think Mega Man within any of those games has a bunch more visual diversity and kind of ideas about level design that don't stay too long. Kind of, it's obviously a much shorter game, but they get them in, they get them out. I think there is visual diversity there. Even moving on to the 16-bit era, I think something like Earthbound is incredibly surprising and joyous on so many occasions. And part of the reason I loved that game so much was because it was so crazy and weird and different and always threw something new at you. And so ultimately, I think it came down to Mario 3 just kept giving me the same thing, and it just kept getting harder, which made me frustrated. Whereas there are other games where I think it diversifies to the point of giving me the joy of discovery and surprise. I think maybe we can, even nail that down to Breath of the Wild, which is built around the idea of discovery and surprise. I think that's a strong point of video games that I don't necessarily think Mario 3, for me personally, hit. So I think I've been thinking about this a lot over the last, since I played the game, Bally, but I feel like I may have nailed it down.
I mean, I have similar feelings about Mario World that have been discussed.
I'm very curious to play Mario World, because I think, from what I've heard about that game and from what I've seen in Mario Maker, which is probably not a fair comparison, that there probably is more visual diversity and surprises in Mario World. And especially it being on the Super Nintendo, it will likely have a better thing to work with when it comes to that.
I think there might be, but there is a lot of things in that game I wasn't a fan of, including the obvious... You die, you get a game where you get sent back worlds and stuff that is just unforgivable. I just cannot get my head around that stuff. But it's just, there's some very frustrating things about that game where I said that at the time, I just like my 2D platformers to be level based. You get from the start level to the end of the level, and you can save at the start and the end of the level. Something like Yoshi's Island, I think that's a great game. And this game just does not have that.
Yeah, well, we'll get to it when I play it, but in any case, thanks, Fizz, for the email, and we're going to kind of use it as a jumping point to build a list of 20 NES/SNES games if we can, and we'll see.
We're taking up his challenge.
We'll see if
he doesn't think we can get to 20.
I don't know if we can.
We'll
see. But before we do that, let's kind of talk quickly about some news stuff, because Nintendo recently announced that they were discontinuing the NES Classic, and there are also rumors from sources such as Eurogamer that there will be a Super Nintendo Classic by the end of the year as well. How do you feel about all this stuff? I feel like it's been a bit of a PR nightmare on Nintendo's end, quite honestly.
Yeah, it kind of has been, because I can't remember the reasoning they gave for discontinuing the NES Classic. I remember someone mentioning it. It was some sort of press statement that said something very inept and inappropriate.
It was like, we understand that people have had a hard time finding these. Also, by the way, we're not doing them anymore, so good luck finding the last ones.
We're going to help you and you'll struggle to find them by not doing them anymore. So it's like... I don't know. When I was in New York at the Nintendo New York store, and they had one on display, and I'd not seen one before, and I sort of thought, that looks really great. I'd be tempted, but ultimately there's not really enough NES games I'm massively into to warrant buying something like that. But then we talked about this at the time when the NES Classic was announced and came out, and we thought, but what if they did a SNES one? And like these rumors, like we're about to talk about a number of SNES games we're very excited that we love, but the prospect of a SNES Classic, just a box with all those great games on it, like really appeals to me, like hugely.
It appeals to me a lot more, not only because I think the quality of the games on the Super Nintendo is generally higher, but also because there are significant ones which I don't have a good way to play right now, and I would like for it to be included in something like that. And I wonder about the price, if they're going to increase it because the value of Super Nintendo games they might hold higher, or if they will just reduce the number of games, say put 15 games as opposed to 30, because obviously, like a value judgment, when you have something that is long and epic, like a Chrono Trigger versus Balloon Fight, for example, like there is a big distinction there. I mean, even on the NES, you had the distinction between like Zelda and Final Fantasy and other kind of small games that didn't have as much to them. But I think the Super Nintendo kind of takes that up another step to some degree. So, yeah, I would be down for one. But here's the weird thing: is like what kind of position are Nintendo going to be in for the holidays, having the Switch and having the Super Nintendo Classic? I don't know, the message is going to be a little weird.
They might be trying to launch a virtual console on Switch at the same time. Like, how do
I feel like the virtual console comes before then, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to, I agree, but whatever way you cut it, there's some sort of clash between Super Nintendo games coming out on Switch and some sort of SNES classic. Like, surely that...
There's a way that they can actually maybe solve this to some degree, which I don't know if they'd be up for, but if they put out this Super Nintendo Classic and they can't meet demand, there's going to be people not getting them, they could do something which alleviates that, in the sense of, what if they put out those exact same games as a bundle on Switch, either on a cartridge or you can download them from the virtual console, but give you the same package of games, but on the Switch as opposed to on this mini Super Nintendo.
It's nice, but come on, like, half the appeal of the NES Classic was the box and controller itself, and that for many people buying that system, they had already played, experienced, or even re-downloaded many of those games on platforms like the Wii U and the Wii, and it was just a case of, it's a really nice sort of gift, I don't know, Christmas gift, birthday gift, that is in one package with that actual tangible mini NES and a controller. Like, that's the appeal, partly to me, for something like the SNES Classic would be something like that. Like, not necessarily the fact that, because I already have access to all these games in some way, shape, or form. So, it's that tangible collector in me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really worked with Amiibo, but
no,
I guess
of course
they're not really tangible. I mean, they're tangible, but they don't really have any kind of benefit. Yeah, I guess, but I feel like I'm coming from the perspective of the Switch as a machine with classic games on it sounds much more appealing to me than the Wii U did, because of that beautiful screen and the idea of taking it everywhere. And the 3DS can obviously do that with some titles, but it was limited to the degree that you can only get Super Nintendo games if you have a new 3DS, right? So, like, the ability to have this grand library of fantastic games on the Switch, I think, is still appealing to a lot of people in the same way that the Super Nintendo Classic is.
Yeah, and I mean, I would, having said what I said, I would still prefer it on the Switch. Like, I'd still take that bundle if it came, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I would much rather not buy the Super Nintendo Classic and just buy a bundle of all those games on Switch if it were the same price, right? Like, that's what I would do. So that's why I think it's potentially a smart idea, because they could catch a lot of people that way and maybe not have as many people annoyed by the fact they couldn't get this little box.
Right.
So.
And, like, I've already got loads of Super Nintendo games on my Wii U. I just want to be able to transfer them, please.
Yeah, God, please talk about that soon. Please tell us there's a way. God damn it. Oh, dear.
But NBZ, we have been challenged.
Yeah, we've been challenged. Gauntlet's been thrown down. Got to make a list of 20 NES.
20 NES and SNES games that we've played and enjoyed.
And enjoy. This is a key component. So I'm banning Mario 3. Yeah. I enjoyed Mario 3, but I think the history of the podcast would be kind of
and we're banning Super Mario World.
Yeah, we're banning Super Mario World, because both of us have been like, don't like that, and not a fan of that. So I think if we really talked about it, we would both say we enjoyed those games.
Right.
Like, I think they're good games, but also
the
reason this list exists is because of our divergent opinions.
History claims those two games to be in the uppermost tier, uppermost echelon of classic games. They are just like these untouchable things that are great, and we just do not share that opinion.
We just think they're kind of okay.
They're okay. I think that they're fun. They're okay. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't great. Yeah. There we go. So let's go. What's the first
let's
game?
kick this list off then with the original Super Mario Brothers. Which, I actually kind of enjoyed playing through the original Super Mario Brothers. It's not the greatest thing in the world. It's incredibly simple, but it is the foundation for a lot of video games to come. And I don't know. There was something about it that didn't really frustrate me. It doesn't have the weird difficulty spikes that Mario 3 had, and it was just kind of, it was a curious thing to go into, and I kind of was like, okay, this is kind of fun. You played the Game Boy Color version of it, didn't you?
Yeah, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe.
I believe so.
That came out free on some sort of 3DS. It was
Something.
weird. It was some celebration of something. Nintendo's always celebrating something. So it was,
yeah, obviously.
What was it? I can't even remember. But yeah, we all got it for free, and I played that, and I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one on the list. Then let's go to Earthbound, because we got to have Earthbound. I think Earthbound might be my. Oh God, it's hard between Earthbound and Chrono Trigger, but I'm gonna say that it's in the top echelon. I think Earthbound is better than Super Metroid and Link to the Past, which are the two kind of other classic Super Nintendo games. I don't know how you feel about that, Bally.
It's tight for me. I really enjoy. I'd put Super Metroid above Link to the Past personally. It's tight between Super Metroid and Earthbound for me. But I mean, we talked about this game with our third backlog club last year, and wow, that was an experience. And I'd highly recommend going back and checking out that episode if you're perhaps a new listener to the show, because if you have not experienced Earthbound, it is quite something. And it was something we'd been meaning to do for a very long time. And
yeah, totally.
The time just became right, and I spent one day playing something crazy like 12 to 14 hours of that game, and it was absolutely insane. And I agree. I admit I was kind of trying to catch up with you, NVZ, with timings for the backlog club, etc. But it was still really enjoyable, and
it's a compelling enough game to warrant that. You know?
Yeah, you want to know what's going to happen next and where you're going to go next, and it sounds simple, but not enough video games do that.
Yeah, that joy of surprise, as I've already discussed.
As Breath of the Wild does.
Yeah, and very important. Yeah, we need to talk about what our next backlog club thing is going to be. It's been a little while. We definitely need to get one going.
For the summer.
We'll figure that out, and we'll get back to you. If you have any ideas for a backlog club, shoot us an email. ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We'll remind you at the end of the program as well of that want address. But I guess we'll just fill in Link to the Past and Super Metroid here, because you can't really go wrong with either of those games. I want to replay Link to the Past. I kind of played it through in a week, and I don't remember it that well when I think about it now.
It's just a blur.
But it's a great game, and I always hold the opinion that it's not quite the Zelda that I like, because it is, those dungeons are much more mazes with enemies as opposed to puzzle boxes, which is what I kind of love from the series. But it's definitely an excellent addition, and I'm a big fan of it. And Super Metroid, if it had the controls of Zero Mission, I think it might be one of the best games of all time. As it stands, I still think it's one of the best games of all time, but it's not quite got that slickness that I like from the GBA versions.
As slick, but there's a feeling I think that game does that I don't think other 2D Metroids can replicate in the same way. There's something about it that's very intangible.
Yeah,
really like.
Also in terms of just the world design, like going from place to place and how they interlock, I just think it's expertly crafted to that degree. So the next one, Bally, you talked about it in the last segment, or the first segment, F-Zero.
The launch game of the SNES, like we mentioned earlier. It's a good game. I liked it. It's
that's the criteria for this list. You had to like the game.
I liked it. Next game, let's go.
Next game. You already talked about it. Mega Man 2. Mega Man 2 possibly the best game on either of these lists. I don't know. Maybe. I put it pretty high.
We're not ordering them here. We're just this is us meeting Fizz's challenge.
Yeah, this is being the challenge. So how many have we got so far? That's 5, 6, I think.
Right. Yeah.
That's 6 after. So we're going to put Mega Man 3 in there as well. I think Mega Man 3 is a good game. And then Mega Man X, which is one that I think you got to get around to at some point, Bally.
Okay.
It's a very different style of game from 2. It keeps a lot of the DNA of Mega Man, but it's got a lot of that wall jumping stuff going on, and it has some interesting kind of backtracking things that I appreciated. Mega Man X is a fantastic game. Then we have one of your picks, Bally. So
Donkey
a
Kong
rare
Country.
classic.
I absolutely love this game. I think it held up. It gets so much stick now for the way it looks, and I actually like the way it looks in a really weird way. I just think it's the slower paced, more thoughtful platformer in my view. I think the original Donkey Kong Country is a more simplistic game than Mario World or Mario Bros. 3 or whatever 2D platform we want to compare it to. But there's a real vibe to that game that is slower paced. The music music is more relaxed. It's a great score, and Donkey Kong's just better than Mario. Come on, like he's just
we're all
of
full of
2D
controversies. Full of God, don't say that, Jesus. Oh boy, I want to start some fires in here. I guess against my good wishes, you've added Yoshi's Island to this list, which, if you want to be sick, sure, play Yoshi's Island. But
I really want someone else to write in just to agree with you that they might feel sick with this game, because I think it's the most unusual game to...
You need to show Caroline Yoshi's Island, because I need some confirmation. It's the other person I know who gets sick very easily.
I need to show her, this 2D platformer. I'll give it a go. I really like Yoshi's Island. I think Yoshi's gone astray in a way that I don't think DK has in the same way, but yeah, I think the original Yoshi's Island is such an improvement on Mario World. This is Mario World 2. I mean, it's a completely different game. It's very harsh to compare them, but
you can't really, but
this game has a really great art style, which is just aged in such an awesome way.
And it also uses the FX chip in some cool ways, like the falling platforms.
Cool
and
ways
stuff
that make it impossible to re-emulate or something, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't actually played the Super Nintendo version of this,
No, I
have you?
played the Game Boy Advance version,
yeah.
which
the everyone
purists,
says is bad. So.
The purists say you can't see enough screen, but I beg to differ. But
and I guess also the GBA with the sound chip, a lot of people don't like, so that's the thing.
But yeah,
but we'll throw it onto the list anyway, because you've basically played it. Next one is Castlevania, the original. I had a blast with. It's fucking hard as balls and bullshit in so many ways, but also great. Like, I love it. I think it is memorization, the game done well, and every screen of Castlevania is memorable. Every time you get to a place, you're like, I remember this. I need to remember how I did this, because there is a specific way for doing the specific area that is going to work. And you get into this rhythm that is just super, super intense. And it's a challenge for sure, but I love the original Castlevania, and it is one of the best NES games, I think, despite having not played enough. But, this is what we're basing this list on. All right, next up is Chrono Trigger, which I've already mentioned. I think I've talked to death. Bally, before this podcast crawls to its end, you need to fucking play Chrono Trigger, right? We're not friends anymore, okay?
I'll play it.
Gauntlet.
I wanted to go out on Switch. Come on. Let's have it.
That'd be great. Virtual console. I'm so confused as to why Square never put out any of their fucking things on Wii U. Like, didn't get Final Fantasy VI, that came out in Japan. Didn't get Chrono Trigger. I guess Chrono Trigger's on DS, so it's less egregious, but... Like,
sorry,
come on,
Final
Square.
Fantasy VI came out on Wii U Virtual Console in Japan.
It did, yeah. And it didn't come out for us. It's on Wii Virtual Console, so if you want to dig into the fucking depths of the Wii Shop channel, be my guest. But there's no other way you can play Final Fantasy VI on the Wii U in our country. So thanks, Nintendo. Let's hope they fix that. And then the next one is one that I played, I guess, at a time when it was needed to be played, which was very sadly after the passing of Satoru Iwata, but it was Balloon Fight, a game that he was involved very heavily in and was crucial to the creation of, and a game which I still think is super fun to this day.
Yeah, it's that original formula. It's the Flappy Bird before Flappy Bird. It's and that's a long time before Flappy Bird when you think about it. It's crazy. It's a really solid idea and mechanic that works, and it's someone like Iwata who comes up with stuff like that. Like, there's few people who come up with these unique mechanics that you see in video games that go on to be repeated over years and years in different styles.
It's interesting because I was watching a Jeremy Parish video on Balloon Fight, and the main mode of Balloon Fight which is the kind of the multiplayer hitting balloons and killing enemies on screen together, or even griefing one another, is essentially a straight rip-off of a game called Joust, which I think a lot of people reference, and is... I'm not sure what system it came out on, but it was a very early, like, kind of Amiga Day style thing, where you're kind of like, on these chickens and flying around with this jousting thing. You had to kill people. But the other mode, which is Balloon Trip, which is the one that we're kind of referencing in relation to Flappy Bird, was, I think, kind of just whole cloth this new creation. So it's interesting that the main mode is the one that isn't actually as innovative as you might think, but the other one is. So I mainly like Balloon Fight for Balloon Trip, honestly.
Yeah.
So that's where I've come down on it. And then the next game, which I think it might be our last game, and we need to count up how many we have right now, because it's not 20. But Bally, how about you talk about that one?
It's Excite Bike, and I've experienced this game mainly through two ways. Now you're probably wondering, like, Bally, what's the other way you experienced this game?
I think I do know what the other way is, and I want to hazard a guess.
Go for it.
Is it the card reader, which I can't remember the fucking name of?
The e-card reader, exactly.
The e-card reader,
yes.
yeah.
I had like a small stack of cards. I believe it was 3, 4, 5 cards, and I'd have to scan all 5 cards into my card reader, and then I could play Excite Bike.
On the GBA?
On the GBA, I should say. Yeah, the e-card reader, that was strange.
It's a hell of a weird thing that never came out here, and the only reason you have one is because you went to America and bought it.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, my memory's just flooding back with that thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and of course, the 3DS Classics, everyone got it for free on the 3DS as well. So
yes.
I've played quite a bit of this. Like, I really enjoyed the technique of, like, there's a lot of technique to this game, and like working out how you land jumps essentially, and when to boost, when not to boost. That was obviously repeated in games like Excite Truck. It's a core mechanic of that game, which is a good game because it's ultimately push your luck in order to benefit. And I guess games like F-Zero GX do similar things, but it's a really important mechanic when it comes to racing games that I think works really well in this game. This game even has a course creator mode and things like this, and there's a lot more depth to it than meets the eye initially. And for an NES game, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's cool. I think the 3D Classics did a good job of making that feel unique in a way. I don't know. Excite Bike is one of those things where it's a very weird thing and it's a cool concept, but it's very simple. And I think the added benefit of having the 3D visuals like gave it a bit of a pop. I think that's the first time I'd seen something like that, because they hadn't done any other NES style games in stereoscopic. So they did it with Kid Icarus as well, which is not on this list because I think Kid Icarus is fucking trash. I really don't like Kid Icarus at all. I watched Nintendo Capri Sun play through it, and man, that game gets fucking weird and hard, and just ugh. I never want to play Kid Icarus. Like, it has these dungeons that are horrible. It's bad. You get turned into fucking eggplant, and it's awful. You have to run around like an idiot. Anyway, that's 14 games, Bally. So we failed at Fizz's challenge because I can't think of any other NES or Super Nintendo games that I've played properly that I've enjoyed. I feel like I've played a bunch of these games like over the years, randomly on emulators and on other random people's houses and things like that.
But they don't cut the mustard.
Yeah, I guess not. It's a shame, but we can't do it. So we're going to fill out this list with 6 other games that we want to play, that we think are interesting to us, and that we'd be curious to get on board with. So I'm going to tick one off the list straight away because we've already talked about it. It's Final Fantasy VI. I have to play this game. It's probably, if we're talking about one game that is a classic that I haven't played, that I want to play the most, it's Final Fantasy VI. So that's there. Then we've got Super Mario Kart for you, Bally, because strangely enough, despite having played most Mario Kart games, this is the one that missed you by.
I've played every single Mario Kart game apart from this one.
Oh wow, yeah.
And like I've touched it here and there. Someone's had it somewhere at some point, and I have experienced this game, but I've never owned it and never played it for any substantial period of time. So Super Mario Kart, it's got to get tried out at some point. Yeah,
I'm interested to see how you react to that, because you weren't a huge fan of Super Circuit, but I know people hold this one in much higher regard than the GBA game.
Yeah. Exactly. On paper, it looks a bit like Super Circuit, but you're right. People love this a lot more.
Yeah. Next up, Super Mario RPG, the genesis of the Paper Mario / Mario and Luigi series. Again, this is a Square Enix creation. It's not really... I mean, Nintendo was involved, but yeah, this is a weird one, and it's a game that I've watched a playthrough of before, so I kind of know the bones of it, but yeah, I've never played through it myself. That's one that I would like to hit, and it'd be cool to like go through, starting with this and then play Paper Mario, and then go through all those, because it's a series that I haven't gone to the roots of. I've played a lot of the Mario and Luigi stuff, but not the older RPGs, so it's one I'm interested in. And then next up we have Secret of Mana, which is a classic that everyone talks about, that I'm not really that familiar with. I know it's RPG-esque, but I think it's also kind of action-based. I think it kind of blends this line between Zelda and Final Fantasy. And I think Secret of Mana is also a co-op game, so that would be the sort of thing where we could play together through that game. I think that would be very cool.
But that sort of action combination, isn't that something that a game like Golden Sun does a lot of?
No, Golden Sun is a turn-based RPG. The thing that's different about Golden Sun is... Yeah, it is. Golden Sun has kind of world puzzles that use some of your abilities that are Zelda-esque. Okay. So, like, you're pushing stones and things, like, with abilities that is kind of Zelda-type puzzles in the overworld. But Golden Sun is very much an RPG in the traditional sense. But yeah, we'll get to that maybe at some point. Then the fifth one is Contra, because I watched Dan and Vinny over at Giant Bomb play through Contra, and just as an NES game, it looks incredibly slick and fast-paced and an action romp and good fun, and the sort of co-op thing that I think we'd have a good fun time with. I feel like I've played some version of Contra before. It might have been like a re-release of it, or maybe it was a Metal Slug game. I can't remember. It was at someone's house years ago, and I remember sitting down.
I swear it was Metal Slug. I'm sure I've played it with you or something.
Yeah, it might have been, but Contra is kind of the origin of that idea.
Do you think
of
that
just,
could come out on Switch, and we could just take a Joy-Con each and play it that way?
I'm sure it would allow that. Yeah, that would be really cool. So keep an eye out, hopefully, for that happening. And then finally, it's a game that has been sitting on my Wii U forever, and again, it's part of the 30 pence collection, Kirby's Adventure on NES. Which is like the latest era game possible. I think someone was recently saying that Kirby's Adventure came out literally like a year before N64 happened, or before PS1 happened, I think. Yeah, because the weird timeline thing going on where the NES just kept selling, right, even after Super Nintendo was out. So they kept making games for it, and Kirby's Adventure was like one of the last ones to ever come out on the NES, and it was like 1994 or something ridiculous when it came out, and PS1 I believe was 96, maybe 95 in Japan. So yeah, that's fucking crazy. Like, you go from Kirby's Adventure to Metal Gear Solid. What kind of a movement is that? I guess Metal Gear Solid is much later, in like 98 or whatever.
Right.
But still, the point stands. But I want to play Kirby's Adventure. That's my point. I don't know if you've got access to this at all, Bally.
Maybe it's on the Wii U Virtual Console.
Yeah, it's probably fun. Yeah, we'll give it a go. So there you go. That's 20 games. 6
Fizz
we haven't played yet.
Us.
He beat us. Well, of course we weren't going to be able to do this.
We were 6 short.
Yeah, we're real bad. This is fucking between the two of us. We probably could have made a list of 20, but the spirit of the question was games that we enjoyed.
Right.
Of course. So with that, Bally, I think we're going to close things out for the episode this week. Where can people find us and do things like that on the internet?
Please find me on the internet. I'm at Ballyman91 on Twitter. That's BALLYMAN91. I'd highly recommend also checking out the podcast Twitter account, which is at TNL Podcast. That's at TNL Podcast. That is the best place to go to see when new episodes of the show are out, and to check out our YouTube channel, which is, of course, youtube.com/ThisNintendoLife, where we're currently doing a Let's Play of The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker.
We are indeed. It's getting better, I think. I'm remembering how to use a Wii U gamepad, but that's it's fun time. Yeah. You can find me on the internet at Lordnbz on the Twitter. You can write into the show at an email address that we have, which Bally will remind you of right now.
ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Please send in your thoughts and your questions. We really want them. We need them. They keep the show going.
As we said in the email section, we we're digging through some old stuff right now, and we'd like a bit of a refresher. So if you can refresh the bucket for us, that would be much appreciated. So send in your emails. We read them all, and we'll get to it if it's a good one. So then you can be found in various places. We're on iTunes. We're on Stitcher. I checked Google Play the other day, Bally. Still not in our country, so fun times. But yeah, we can be found on every podcast app available. Just go into whatever podcast app you have. I use Pocket Casts. It's pretty good, I guess. I think it's like the only good Android podcast app. Apple has much better selection, so that's it's a thing that you people out there could probably take a look at and download us on. So subscribe and download us, all that stuff. It's great. Come straight to your door, if your door is your phone, which that is my door. The door into my window of my life. I'm going off on a tangent now, Bally, so we need to close the show out. Anything to say before we leave this mess behind us?
I think that was an above average show. I think it was good.
Okay, all right. Looping it back around to the
circle.
start. Sure, we come full circle.
There we go.
I agree. I think it was above average. And I think you all listening are also very much above average. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for sticking with the show. We appreciate you. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time with some more podcasts and some more video games, some more Nintendo. Until then, thanks for listening. Goodbye, everyone. The musical interludes used on today's episode were a rock remix of Big Blue and Mute City from F-Zero and Rivers in the Desert from Persona 5, copyright Atlas 2017.